Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Nahmadu wa nusalli wa nusallimu ala Rasul Kareem, and welcome everyone to the Islamic Knowledge Podcast, Season 1, Episode 1. We're starting off with today's session on Tadabbur, and Mullah Zubair is going to be my co-host. We'll kind of be taking over a little bit each other's spot as well. And this is just going to be a very simple concept. We're not going to keep this podcast very, very long. Like some podcasts, so mashallah, they go on for 1 hour. This one will hopefully be a bit shorter. And the idea is, what we're doing is, and this was Mullah Zubair's idea, I've got to give him credit for it. We take one verse from the Qur'an every single episode, and we basically do like a 20, 30 minute, max 40 minute podcast, and we just speak about the ayah, and we just tell you everything we know about this ayah. And maybe you can, in the comments, you can tell us something about this ayah that we didn't know as well. And today's episode is all about the ayah of Tadabbur, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, أَفَلَا يَتَدَبَّرُونَ الْقُرْآنَ وَلَوْ كَانَ مِنْ عِنْدِ غَيْرِ اللَّهِ لَوَجَدُوا فِيهِ اخْتِلَافًا كَثِيرًا. And this is in Surah An-Nisa, and it's in the 5th juz. And Mullah Zubair, if you want to just chip in a little bit before we get straight into the ayah.
Yeah, Jazakallah khair, Mufti. So I think, as you mentioned, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, نحمده ونصلي ونسلم على رسوله الكريم أما بعد. As you mentioned, that the podcast, the purpose isn't that we talk War and Peace on X, Y, and Z, but just a 30 minutes, limited to maximum 20 to 40 minutes. But we focus on, the best of all speeches and the best of all knowledges, which is the knowledge of Deen and also the knowledge of the Qur'an. So I think, as you mentioned, we don't need to delay any further, but the ayat that we are going to look at today is أَفَلَا يَتَدَبَّرُونَ الْقُرْآنَ. And I think I want to probably start by basically asking yourself, Mufti Muaz, that what is the meaning of this ayat? Where is it mentioned in the Qur'an? How many times has Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned this in the Qur'an?
I mean, with regards to, by the way, even the podcast that we spoke about as well, one of the main benefits that I think Mullah Zubair and I spoke about is that we can kind of just benefit ourselves. We can look into one ayah. The whole podcast becomes a sort of beneficial resource for us to go back to as well. So let's look at أَفَلَا يَتَدَبَّرُونَ الْقُرْآنَ. Do they not ponder over the Qur'an? Afala, do they not? Yatadabbarun, do they not ponder al-Qur'ana over the Qur'an? وَلَوْ كَانَ مِنْ عِنْدِ غَيْرِ اللَّهِ. And if it were, if كَانَ, it were, مِنْ عِنْدِ غَيْرِ اللَّهِ, from someone other than Allah, if this Qur'an were to be from someone other than Allah, لَوَجَدُوا فِيهِ اخْتِلَافًا كَثِيرًا. They would have found a lot of contradictions within it. So let's start off with the first part. أَفَلَا يَتَدَبَّرُونَ الْقُرْآنَ. The word pondering in Arabic here is the word that Allah Ta'ala uses is tadabbur. This actually comes from the idea of dabara, which is the end of something. Because this is the idea of like the end of something, which is what you think of whenever you're about to do something. You think of what's the end result of this? What will I get out of it? That's why the du'as you read at the end of salah are called fi adbari salawat, at the end of the salah. So what does at-tadabbur mean? The scholars mention النظر في أدبار الشيء والتفكير في عاقبته. To look into the end result of something and to think about the result of it, the consequence of it. So in every ayah, we're thinking, okay, what's the end result of this ayah? What's the purpose? What's Allah Ta'ala trying to tell us here? We're going deep and we're pondering over it. And the word tadabbur actually comes from the level or scale of tafa'ul in Arabic. And this scale has this very speciality where it means something you do one after the other, to exert your effort into something one after the other. So it's marratan ba'da marra. So you're thinking, it's like that thing it's like Allah Ta'ala wants the Quran to be something which like day and night, we're just like, it's almost like running in our minds. Marratan ba'da marra. Throughout the day, it's like, oh, hey man, I wonder what's the reasoning behind that. Why did Allah put this there? He wants us to all throughout the day just be, concerned about this. And what I find interesting about this whole tadabbur concept in the Quran is Allah Ta'ala mentions it 4 times in the Quran. The first 2 verses are in أَفَلَا يَتَدَبَّرُونَ الْقُرْآنَ, our verse, and then Surah Muhammad, أَفَلَا يَتَدَبَّرُونَ الْقُرْآنَ أَمْ عَلَى قُلُوبٍ أَقْفَالُهَا. These 2 were addressing, you could say, the disbelievers and the hypocrites. And if you look at the second 2 verses, they are in Surah Al-Mu'minun. By the way, sorry, the first 2 are in addressing the hypocrites. So Surah Nisa and Surah Muhammad, أَفَلَا يَتَدَبَّرُونَ الْقُرْآنَ وَلَوْ كَانَ مِنْ عِنْدِ غَيْرِ اللَّهِ, and أَفَلَا يَتَدَبَّرُونَ الْقُرْآنَ أَمْ عَلَى قُلُوبٍ أَقْفَالُهَا. These are for hypocrites. The second 2, أَفَلَمْ يَدَّبَّرُوا الْقَوْلَ أَمْ جَاءَهُمْ مَا لَمْ يَأْتِ آبَاءَهُمُ الْأَوَّلِينَ. And the last one, the 4th one, كِتَابٌ أَنزَلْنَاهُ إِلَيْكَ مُبَارَكٌ لِيَدَّبَّرُوا آيَاتِهِ. This is for disbelievers. So first 2, tadabbur is being commanded for the hypocrites. And the disbelievers are also being told in the second two verses to also have tadabbur and to ponder over the Quran. Now, my key question is, and something that it blew my mind when I read this, is why is Allah telling the hypocrites and the disbelievers to ponder over the Quran, whereas really it should be us? The implicit idea, and by the way, some of these meanings that I'm giving you about Tadabbur are actually taken from this book, and this is more for the scholars, but this is a book by Sheikh Musa'id al-Tayyar called Mafhum al-Tafsir wa-Ta'wil wal-Istinbat wa-Tadabbur wal-Mufassir. But in any case, that's more for scholars. But what I'm saying is, why is Allah Ta'ala telling the disbelievers and hypocrites to ponder over the Quran? The implicit idea is the believers are already doing this. The believers have already done this, and they're already doing this, and that's how they got to where they are. And really, the question is that if this is what Allah is expecting of us, I mean, He's expecting us to go way beyond the reading and translating of the Quran. And the question really for us is, are we even reading the Quran? So that's something for us to kind of think about.
I'm gonna come in here. I think some very pertinent points we've discussed there, and you've mentioned, Mufti Muaz, with regards to tadabbur, and kind of that it's a given that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is almost saying that if this is what Allah is asking the hypocrites and the disbelievers to look at, then it's almost like, as you said, that the mu'mineen are already expected to do that. But coming back to the tadabbur, and you said that it's towards the ending. So the recitation of the Quran and the memorization, that is also essential. It's not that shouldn't happen, but what tadabbur is that's the next stage. Is that the next stage that comes after? That's the next stage.
Absolutely correct. So what tadabbur actually comes after understanding. So in Arabic we call it understanding faham. You have a faham of something, you understand what this ayah is saying. Now, tadabbur is to go beyond that and to actually go back to like some of the authoritative sources, and you basically try to make sense of this ayah in like what I like to say is like this. Tadabbur is trying to understand the full picture and not just focus on that pixel. That one ayah is the pixel. You want to look at the full picture of the Quran, and you want to do like a zoom out type version. And Ibn Jarir al-Tabari, rahimahullah, was a very, very authoritative writer in tafsir. Under this ayah, he actually says something very unique. Essentially, what Allah is trying to tell us there is Allah is raising the bar. He's raising the bar for the believers. And He's saying the bar for believers is not just learning Arabic. He's saying this ayah is actually an encouragement to learn Arabic, if you think about it. Because how can you do tadabbur? How can you ponder over something if you don't understand it? So understanding Arabic and learning Arabic comes first. So Allah Ta'ala is encouraging us already. You know, we're like the A-star, you could say, students, or like the grade 9 type of students, wherein He's saying for you guys, you should be doing tadabbur. You should be doing pondering. In fact, I expect that from the disbelievers. From you, I expect tadabbur all the more. And therefore, Ibn Jarir al-Tabari mentioned something very interesting, that it's like he's already encouraging us to learn Arabic, to learn the authoritative sources, and then to go beyond that and to add. And what can we add to it? There's a really wonderful book by Ibn al-Qayyim, rahimahullah ta'ala, who a lot of people will already know. He's written brilliant books. He's got a book called Zadul Muhajir ila Rabbi. So he comes to this and he says, like, look, he says, what more can we add to the Quran? It's like all the work has been done. I mean, we got loads of books, mashallah, in our library, and there's more libraries that have much more books than this. All the mufassirun have written all the books on tafsir. What more can we add? Then he says, let me show you what you can add. And he comes to the ayah of where Ibrahim alayhi salam is welcoming those angels into his house. And he just extracts so many benefits from this whole story of Ibrahim alayhi salam welcoming guests who are angels into his house. And then he shows you, look, I'm showing you there's so much more we can do. And so it just shows that as long as you're obviously still connecting with the authoritative sources, you're going back to the Mufassirun, you are still doing a form of tadabbur, and that's very important. But go on.
Yeah, I think that brings a very pertinent point from what you've just said, is that a lot of people sometimes tend to think that tadabbur is something which is only for scholars, and tadabbur is something which is only to be done by, people that have perceived knowledge or students of knowledge. Whereas, is it correct to say that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is actually addressing the mu'mineen generally, and this comes with a clear guidance that we should go to authoritative tafsirs and authoritative sources to get more detail. But in terms of tadabbur on a day-to-day basis, how is that something? Is it that's something that every person should be doing. It's
We
something
should be-
which
we
every
should be doing
Muslim
that.
should be doing
Yeah.
within their own life. So
100
how can a person do that within their day-to-day life? What does the Quran bring to them for their day-to-day life to do tadabbur?
Yeah, absolutely. So essentially, we're asking what kind of falls under tadabbur, right? And tadabbur in that sense is, you could say tafsir itself is a form of tadabbur. So learning the books of tafsir. Now, in terms of learning the books of tafsir, you can read any main books. I know you used to read, mashallah, a lot of, you still do Ma'arif al-Quran, the app. I think you benefited from that a lot.
I think, as you said, Mufti Shafi Sahib, rahimahullah, is a authoritative figure in tafsir, mashallah, and his tafsir is accessible now on apps as well as the books. If some people cannot access the kitabs.
If I can just butt in, I remember there is an actual app of Ma'arif al-Quran, and you could actually just get down App Store or Play Store, whatever there is. In my sense, from the academic world, from the ulama world, obviously I know ulama will be using an app, and I'll put the link in the description. I'll put it in the center of the screen as well. It's called الباحث القرآني. That's also very, very good. I just want to speak also for English speakers, because I know English speakers will look at this and say, well, how do I do tadabbur? I think what I would really recommend is Sheikh Abdul Rahim Limbada and Ustad Asim Khan and some of these guys, mashallah, some of these scholars, they've got these lovely like short surahs that they write tafsirs on. Like they'll do
I've seen it.
I think Sheikh Farhan Zubaydi's got a few as well. I think it's really important to get a copy of these and to just kind of like think about the verses. And then one of the ways you can actually do it is, I know this might sound like, are you encouraging people to just like think about their own interpretation of the verse? But I'm not saying that. Look at the translation, and without looking at any tafsir first, you think from your own mind, what's Allah telling you there, and how does it relate to your life, what Allah is saying there? And then to make sure that obviously you're not just coming up with your own interpretation, because that'd be totally wrong. Make sure you check in like what Maulana Zubair would be using, which is like Ma'arif al-Quran, Mufti Shafi Saab's, and you can use other books as well. And like another good book, by the way, in Urdu, which I've just, I use it sometimes. It's quite good. It's actually called Tadabbur Qur'an by Amin Ahsan Islahi. It's quite good, like in terms of connecting the different verses and stuff like that. For the Arabic speakers, there's another very good book that I highly recommend. It's called Al-Qur'an Tadabburun wa Amal. This one's really unique, honestly. You open it up and it's like, is the Quran in the middle? And then this is more for Arabic speakers again, but we do have an Arabic audience, so I just want to kind of let them know that in Arabic, on the side, he's got all the explanations. He's even got things you can do in the day to ponder over the verse as well. So this is really beneficial. By the way, tadabbur includes this whole idea of istinbat, extracting new meanings that you think are relevant for your life or for your situation in life at the moment. That's also part of tadabbur as well. Maulana, should we move on to the next?
Just to add to the final part of when you're saying about the tafsirs, there's a lot of apps available within. I think there's one app. If you go on Qur'an.com, for example, you will get Ma'arif al-Quran, not only Ma'arif al-Quran, but you will also get Tafsir Ibn Kathir, Tafsir al-Tabari, Qurtubi, and this is authoritative sources within the field. So I think this is easily accessible, and in a time when everyone's already using their smartphones, this is why it's important that we do put that out there.
You can just say the website again. What was the website?
I think it's Qur'an.com.
Quran.com, that's the one.
Quran.com, but then obviously within there, you have to, the ones that we've mentioned, there are other tafasirs as well, but these are the ones that we can.
I usually use the website, but I think they may have an app as well, Quran.com app. I don't know.
They have an app, and there's also on there. Like I say, you can choose the translators as well. So Mufti Taqi Saab's translation is on there as well. And you've got Dr. Mustafa Khattab. I think he's quite, at the moment, one of the modern interpretations. However, what I mean by that is it's still within the... I think one of the founders behind this whole Quran.com project, or in the sense that one of the people who played a huge role, mashallah, in it was Dr. Suhaib Saeed, Tafsir Doctor. Yes.
Who we'd love to have at one point, inshallah, on the podcast as well, to speak about one verse. What about looking at the time? Like I said, we want to keep this to 20 or 30 minutes, 40 minutes max. If we move on to the next one.
Yeah, so I think in the second part, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions, وَلَوْ كَانَ مِنْ عِنْدِ غَيْرِ اللَّهِ لَوَجَدُوا فِيهِ اخْتِلَافًا كَثِيرًا. So what is the meaning of ikhtilaf here that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is referring to?
So Allah is saying if this Quran were to be from someone else, they would have found a lot of ikhtilaf within it. So Al-Kirmani rahimahullah is a very big scholar in the past, and he's got a book called Gharaib al-Tafsil wa Ajaib al-Ta'wil. And he says that ikhtilaf here is not difference of opinion, because we do have ikhtilaf. In tafsir, we do have ikhtilaf. Like, what does this verse mean? Well, Ibn Abbas says this, Ikramah says this, Mujahid. So what's Allah Ta'ala trying to say here? If it were to be from someone other than Allah, then there would be ikhtilaf within it. But there is ikhtilaf. So does that mean it's not from? No. Ikhtilaf here means contradiction. Okay, well, another question. If Allah is talking about contradiction, what's tadabbur got to do with that? Like, أَفَلَا يَتَدَبَّرُونَ الْقُرْآنِ? If they were to do tadabbur over the Qur'an, and then Allah just jumps onto something else. وَلَوْ كَانَ, if you were to be from other than Allah, you would have found a lot of contradictions. But we don't get it. What's he trying to say? The answer that Mufassirun have given, and it's really interesting, is that it's like as though the solution is the first part and the problem you may have is the second part. What that means is at times you may notice an open contradiction in the Quran. And the solution is, Allah is already hinting towards it by giving you the first part, which is do tadabbur. That contradiction will go on. The Mufassirun say that, you got to hear this. The Mufassirun say something absolutely shocking, and it blows your mind. They say any other book, what Allah is trying to say is any other book, when you come across a contradiction within it, when it's the size of the Quran, I've written a book and there will be contradictions in that book, right? And probably when you think more about the contradiction will get worse. Allah's book is the opposite. There might seem like an open contradiction at the start. The more you think about it, not only does that apparent contradiction disappear, the picture gets clearer. The pixel starts to look like the picture. You're zooming more and more out. So, like I said, Imam al-Suyuti rahimahullah as well, in his Al-Itqan as well, he has a lovely discussion. And inshallah, what we can do here is that we can also mention that there is another version that some of the scholars have mentioned, that it could be a reference to the hypocrites, that the hypocrites used to say that the Quran is not from Allah, but then they would hide certain things and Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam would tell them what they're hiding, and it would be exactly how it was. But the reality is most Mufassirun have said it's the first idea, which is that Allah is saying you will not find any contradictions in there, and if you do find any contradictions, do tadabbur, do the first part, and it will solve it for you.
MashaAllah. That's very, very, very well explained. And I think, just moving on to the final part of the podcast for today. We've discussed the ayat in brief. How do we bring tadabbur in our lives? What are the tips to bring tadabbur in a person's life?
I'm gonna come to that question, but I just thought of something, which is some examples of the tadabbur of the Sahaba, and how they also, kind of reconcile between certain things, and it really opened our minds. We thought there was a contradiction in the Quran, and then the Sahabi does tadabbur, and we get a solution, and we think, wow. So in Sahih al-Bukhari, there's actually a story of this, which is in Kitab al-Tafsir, which is chapter 41 of Sahih al-Bukhari. A man comes to Ibn Abbas radiyallahu anhu, and he says, "Inni ajidu fil Qur'ani ashya'a takhtalifu alayk." Indeed, I'm finding some things in the Quran that, they contradict each other. So Ibn Abbas says, go on, tell me what. So he gives 4 questions to Ibn Abbas, and I'm going to just read them out to you. So basically, the first one is, Allah Ta'ala says in one place about the disbelievers on the day of Qiyamah, "La yaktumun Allah haditha." They won't be able to hide anything from Allah. But in another verse, Allah Ta'ala says that the disbelievers on the day of Qiyamah will say to Allah, "Wallahi Rabbina ma kunna mushrikeen." We did not associate partners with you. So how is that possible? In one verse, the disbeliever on the day of Qiyamah is saying, Allah Ta'ala is saying that the disbeliever on the day of Qiyamah will not be able to hide anything from Allah. And on the day of Qiyamah, we've got another verse saying, he will say, I wasn't a disbeliever. So there he is hiding something from Allah. How does that make sense? So Ibn Abbas gives an answer, and he actually supports it with a hadith. So this is what I mean. When you start looking at tadabbur, the picture doesn't only just incorporate the Quran, incorporates the hadith as well. Ibn Abbas says that first they will try to hide their disbelief. They will say, no, we never did it. But then, so there's a hadith in Sahih Muslim that explicitly mentions that on the day of Qiyamah, he will actually say, the disbeliever will say, Ya Rabbi amantu bika wa bi kitabika wa rasulik wa bi rasulik. Oh Allah, I believed in you and your prophet and your everything. Allah will say, sorry, you stay quiet now. His mouth will be sealed, and suddenly his hand will talk, his feet will talk. And that's what Allah means by La yaktumun Allah haditha. They will try to hide, but they won't be able to hide. The second question is that he asked was that on the day of Qiyamah, one verse says that the disbelievers La yatasa'alun. They won't be able to ask each other questions. Another verse says, فَأَقْبَلَ بَعْضُهُمْ عَلَى بَعْضٍ يَتَسَاءَلُونَ. They will start asking each other questions. What
But
is
it
it?
seems an apparent contradiction.
Yeah.
When someone would read that, if they never did Tadabbur.
Yeah. But really, Ibn Abbas just answers it very quickly, and he says, the first one, which is that they won't ask each other questions, is when they actually die and they're in their graves. They'll just be left alone in their punishment, etc. Then when they come out of their graves, now فَأَقْبَلَ, now they start facing each other and they're like, what's going on? What's happened? So now they'll be asking each other questions. Then the third question is, this one is a bit more intricate, but I'm just going to explain it very quickly. We've got one verse that says, أَإِنَّكُمْ لَتَكْفُرُونَ بِالَّذِي خَلَقَ الْأَرْضَ فِي يَوْمَيْنِ وَتَجْعَلُونَ لَهُ أَنْدَادًا ذَلِكَ رَبُّ الْعَالَمِينَ وَجَعَلَ فِيهَا رَوَاسِيَ مِنْ فَوْقِهَا وَبَارَكَ فِيهَا وَقَدَّرَ فِيهَا أَقْوَاتَهَا فِي 4 أيام سواء للسائلين ثُمَّ اسْتَوَى إِلَى السَّمَاءِ. This verse indicates Allah Ta'ala created the earth first, and then He created the heavens. ثُمَّ اسْتَوَى إِلَى السَّمَاءِ. Then He went up to the heavens, and He created the heavens. Another verse, if you look at it, in the Quran, Allah Ta'ala says, أَمِ السَّمَاءُ بَنَاهَا رَفَعَ سَمْكَهَا فَسَوَّاهَا وَأَغْطَشَ لَيْلَهَا وَأَخْرَجَ ضُحَاهَا وَالْأَرْضَ بَعْدَ ذَلِكَ. And then He created the earth after it. Why is it? Okay. Did He create the earth first? If you look at the first verse says, خَلَقَ الْأَرْضَ فِي يَوْمَيْنِ, and then it carries on. Then He says, ثُمَّ اسْتَوَى إِلَى السَّمَاءِ. Then He went up to the skies. Another verse in the Quran says, أَمِ السَّمَاءُ بَنَاهَا. He created the heavens first. Carries on. وَالْأَرْضَ بَعْدَ ذَلِكَ دَحَاهَا. And then the earth after that, He created it. There's a contradiction. What did He do? Did He create the earth first or the heavens first? So Ibn Abbas says, look, this is, and there's a hadith to prove this. Allah Ta'ala, in 2 days, He created the earth, but not in a fully spread out manner. He laid out the basics of the earth. Then He went into the skies, and this is in a manner that befits Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala. And in 2 days, He created the skies. And then back to the earth, and Allah in another 2 days created all the mountains, the rivers, and all the different facets of the earth. He created it in another 2 days. So 2 days laying down the foundation of earth itself, then 2 days into the skies, organizing how the skies are, all the different layers of the skies, the universe, you could say, outside of the earth, and then coming back, you could say, and sorting out the rivers, the mountains, etc. And the last question that this man had was, why does Allah always say Kana Allahu? Allah was. Kana in Arabic means that was, but Ibn Abbas quickly explains this, that this means He was and He always is. And it's more like a definitive form. I want to just give 3 more before we go on to that question, the brilliant question that you asked. If you notice in the story of Musa alayhi salatu wasalam, Allah Ta'ala in one place refers to the snake as Thu'ban, which is a big snake. And in another place, He refers to it as Jan, which is a small snake. So what is it? Which snake did Musa alayhi salam have in his staff? So Az-Zarkashi rahimahullah in his book called Al-Burhan, he gives an answer to this, and he says, and he's obviously implicating that this is coming from the Sahaba, this explanation. It was a big snake, but it moved as fast as a small snake. So you can see how the Quran is working here. Another example, Inna Allah la ya'muru bil fahsha. Indeed, Allah does not command you to do wretched and wrong things. In another verse, Allah says, أَمَرْنَا مُتْرَ فِيهَا فَفَسَقُوا فِيهَا فَحَقَّ عَلَيْهِ الْقَوْلِ. That when the disbelievers get really arrogant against the Prophet, Allah commands the evildoers from amongst them, and then they start doing evil things. So I thought Allah doesn't command wretched things. So Zarkashi gives an answer. The first is a command that is Shar'i command. Allah does not want you in Sharia to do bad things. The second one is the will of Allah. Yes, everything, even an evil deed, is committed with the will of Allah, but it's not what Allah wants us to do. So there's a difference between, one is called Amr Shar'i, one is called Amr Takwini, that which happens through the will of Allah, because nothing can happen without the will of Allah. And last one, I'm a bit obsessed with this, so I'm going to have to do it, which is, this one's beautiful. This one's beautiful. Get ready for this one. الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَتَطْمَئِنُّ قُلُوبُهُمْ بِذِكْرِ اللَّهِ. Those who believe and their hearts become satisfied with the dhikr of Allah. But you and I know there's another verse which says, إِذَا ذُكِرَ اللَّهُ وَجِلَتْ قُلُوبُهum. When Allah is mentioned, their hearts go like, they go into a state of, which one is it? I thought you said you gain satisfaction by mentioning Allah. Here you're saying you gain worry. So there's another verse that actually reconciles between these two verses, which is, تَقْشَعِرُّ مِنْهُ جُلُودُ الَّذِينَ يَخْشَوْنَ رَبَّهُمْ ثُمَّ تَلِينُ جُلُودُهُمْ وَقُلُوبُهُمْ إِلَى ذِكْرِ اللَّهِ. So what happens is, they're always fearful of misguidance. They find satisfaction in worshipping Allah. Yes, تَطْمَئِنُّ قُلُوبُهُمْ بِذِكْرِ اللَّهِ, but not negligence. Rather, what happens is they're always fearful of misguidance. And this beautifully combines, by the way, that idea that Iman is between fear and hope. So they have a lot of satisfaction when they're worshipping Allah, but at the same time, wajilat qulubuhum, when the ayat of Allah, when the dhikr of Allah is mentioned, the Quran of Allah is discussed, they are worried, like, hopefully we don't fall into misguidance and we stop believing in this Quran. And taqsha'iru minhu juludul ladhina yakhshawna rabbahum perfectly, encapsulates the idea. One of the best books I would recommend for, this tadabbur and this reconciliation is Tafsir al-Kabir of Fakhruddin al-Razi, which is just really, really good at different times. But then that brings us to that part explained, and now inshallah,
I think, just before you touch on that, I think an example of our Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam, I read somewhere as well of tadabbur in his life, the famous hadith where he mentions that Surah Waqi'ah and Surah Hud have actually made me old, and that was in essence meaning that Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam wasn't just reciting the Quran and wasn't just memorizing the Quran, but it was actually having a physical impact on him, that he mentioned that it actually has resulted in me going old because of a result of, because in these ayats Allah talks about the punishment and all the horrors of the day of judgment. So
100%. Like in that way, you could say it was like it matured the Prophet ﷺ into not matured him, was already mature, but like it made him more aware of what the reality of the situation is. Not that he wasn't aware, but you got to be very sensitive about this topic. But in another way, what I get where you're coming from, tadabbur may actually be the solution for a lot of the problems in our life, difficulties we go through. Maybe tadabbur over the Quran. I believe someone, I can't remember if it was Sheikh Ustad Hamza Zotsi or someone who said this, that if we look at innama ashku bathi wa huzni ila Allah as well, Yaqub alayhi salam in that area as well, where he's really upset about the loss of Yusuf alayhi salam and Binyamin alayhi salam, but because he's like thinking about the Quran, and because he's engaged in the worship of Allah and he's doing tadabbur over the, he mentions in that context, I forgot the exact way in which he explained it, Ustaz Hamza, but it was very good. He explained that through that focus with Allah and that focus on tadabbur and thinking about the Quran, thinking about the book that had been given to them, he was able to kind of channel his emotions, etc., that he was going through in his life at that point. So sometimes tadabbur will, like I said, it allows you to see that. We always say to a person who's struggling or a person that might be in any situation, we say that stop looking at the pixel, look at the picture. And tadabbur is literally that. It allows you to kind of do that. And obviously one of the most important things we can do is just keep supplicating and making dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that he grants us the ability to do tadabbur, because really tadabbur is a gift. You either are gifted with it from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala or you're not. Like for example, Ibn Abbas, Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam made dua for him. That's why he was from amongst the Sahaba, he had probably the best ability to do tafsir, because Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam made dua for him. Allahumma allimhu al-kitab. Oh Allah, teach him the meanings, ta'wil al-kitab, explain the meanings of the Quran to him and allow him to have a good understanding of the Quran. So make dua, ask others to make dua. How many times have we, like, this is something that I'm just thinking about as I'm saying this. What's the last time you asked someone a dua? Make dua to Allah Ta'ala that he grants me an understanding of the Quran, that he grants me the tadabbur of the Quran. So this is really, really important.
I think leads on really well to the tips for how to bring tadabbur within your life on a day-to-day basis. MashaAllah, we've covered the essence of tadabbur, but from a layman's perspective, in terms of day-to-day, what we can do to make sure that it's not just done for one day, it becomes a habit. And I think another point within that I thought of when you were speaking earlier is that, mashallah, we can find Quranic gems. But I read again in one of the small booklets I was reading that the purpose of tadabbur is not merely extracting amazing gems from the Quran, but it should lead us to implementing the commandments of Allah and the sunnah of his beloved sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So that is the ultimate goal of tadabbur. But then how should you do tadabbur? What are the 3-4 ways to do tadabbur within a day-to-day context? What does a person do?
I was just, as you're mentioning, one of the answers that came to me, and something that I don't do actually, and I'm thinking, after this podcast, maybe that's one of the benefits of this podcast, that maybe this is something I could bring into my life and something that the listeners could think about as well. Maybe a tadabbur journal, think of an ayah every day, think of what's going on in your life, and, go on Qur'an.com, because Qur'an.com has the translations. If you're feeling very upset, typing something about sadness, etc., get the ayah. Okay, go deeper into the ayah, write something down. And, have a journal wherein you can write down, take one ayah, the meaning of the ayah, and how does it relate to your life today? make it relate somehow to your life today. And over time, you're building like a dictionary of like, you could say your thoughts, your reflections on the Quran. At the same time, I do want to emphasize, you do keep going back to the tafasir, Tafsir Ibn Kathir,
100%.
Tafsir of Ibn Jarir al-Tabari, all of these authentic tafsir books, especially Ibn Jarir's tafsir, which is obviously the mother of all books when it comes to tafsir. But dua, making a tadabbur journal, perhaps.
When you say Ibn Jarir, I think just so for the audience, they won't find it as Ibn Jarir. It'll be Tabari.
Tafsir al-Tabari. Correct.
Tabari.
Tafsir al-Tabari, which is, by the way, also
obviously you're on first name terms with them, but for us, we need to kind of know.
Of course.
Because they might look for Tafsir Ibn Jarir and say, okay, there's nothing there.
Absolutely.
Tafsir al-Tabari.
Tafsir al-Tabari and also Tafsir Ibn Kathir. But for them, I think even just Ma'arif al-Quran of Mufti Shafi, even by the way, this Tadabbur al-Quran, I was checking, it's actually been translated into English. So even this one, Ahsan Islahi, it's been translated into English.
Understand, obviously everyone knows of Ibn Kathir as well. That's readily available there as well. But Tafsir al-Tabari, you might not find the English version of it. So that's why I think it's
and it is quite technical. It's quite deep.
So I think Tafsir Ibn Kathir, you can easily find the English versions, and Ma'arif al-Quran, I think, is an amazing tafsir, especially from one of our akabirin to kind of read into and kind of understand.
So I think that's my key answer there, that I would say take one verse at a time. Sometimes when you obviously do read the translation of the Quran, especially in the month of Ramadan, etc., but take from your translation as you're reading Quran every day, just take one verse and let it stick in your mind the whole day, and just kind of like internalize that translation and just think about how, like, what's Allah trying to say? Like, as you're driving, make an active effort.
So personalize it to your life.
Personalize it to your life. Like, how does this relate to me? What's Allah saying to me here? How could it relate to, or in this situation as well? I think this ayah could work if you think about it, because this is, now obviously some of it, you may not want to write it down and verbalize it to everyone, but it's for you, it's very good because it's going to make a big impact in your life. So that's one of the ways. And like I said, one of the best ways.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. One of the ways that I think you just inspired me to think of that is, one of the other ways is that you kind of visualize. So when you read the Quran Sharif ayats, and I think you will find this within, everyone knows the words Jannat and Jahannam, what they mean, but do we, when the verses are said, if our mind and our hearts go towards Jannah and how I can achieve that, and when it comes on the verses of Jahannam, just a simple thought, for example, when you read the word Jahannam, to think that, okay, how will that be on that day? To visualize it.
Absolutely.
Then automatically that's a level of tadabbur which can happen very easily while you're reciting the Quran as well.
Yeah.
So
and, that is a brilliant way of explaining that. Imagination, the journal idea, we said making dua to Allah, that's going to be right at the top of the list. So these are all different ways in which we said also that, first for a little while, look at the ayah on your own. Don't look at any tafasir. Try to understand what you think, based on the translation. But then after that, please don't just stick to that, because your understanding means nothing if it doesn't fall in line, in the sense that we don't just apply our own interpretation to the Quran. We must look at what the authentic tafasir have said, but apply your own mind in the sense that what's it got to do with your life. So personalize the ayah, inshallah. But I think, Maulana Zubair, this has been a really enjoyable podcast.
Beautiful insights, amazing insights. Jazakallah Mufti Muaz. And Jazakallah to all the listeners. And inshallah, do continue to subscribe and also like, and also share with people who can also benefit from this. And inshallah, we will end the podcast on this. Jazakallah khair.
Yeah, inshallah. And we hope to see you on the next
episode. And we can see you on the next episode, inshallah. Jazakallah khair.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.